Hello there, David Bradley, aka Schizophreniforms. I'm just sat in my lovely garden, beautiful as it is, reflecting on the fact that this is now 2 weeks since I started to try and challenge compulsive behaviours in my life, basically. Things that I was doing that made me feel that I was doing things that were out of my control, that I wasn't able to stop doing, that I never believed I even had a problem with until I really addressed the behaviours and then started to challenge them. So in the direct case of like substance use, for example, I never saw it as an issue until I stopped and I realised how badly compulsively I was doing these things. For example, alcohol. That was a bit of coffee. I haven't managed to knock coffee or the fags on the head just yet, but I'm working towards that because I was addressing other things first. I've cut down a lot on the cigarettes and I'm drinking coffee in a more constructive way. But for example, alcohol, I've had in the past, especially when I was a teenager, a very, very compulsive and addicted nature. When it came to alcohol, I was drinking quite a lot, like an obscene amount, and then I felt it was hopeless. And in the past, in more recent years, I was binge drinking and doing it almost every few days, every day almost at times as well. So for me to be completely abstinent for alcohol, even just in social circumstances where it wasn't necessarily problematic anymore, it's still been quite an eye-opener to actually go without that and realise what my personality was like without that, and perhaps other substances, perhaps other addictive behaviours, like gaming, for example. I would play video games a lot, but I wouldn't really like explore them, follow the story, be interested in it, or do anything, gain anything from it. I was doing it as a matter of compulsion. Or like even music, which is one of my greatest passions. I was doing it because I felt compelled, as though I had to do it, rather than doing it for the reason of self-exploration or self-expression. And I feel like it was after watching this, it was a Russell Brand recovery and addiction video, where they were talking about the brain of an addict and how it's the dopamine reward itself that the addict's addicted to. So it doesn't matter, you get like what's called poly-drug addiction, where there's multiple drugs or multiple substances or multiple compulsive behaviours based on that dopamine reward. And now, because of the meds I take for my schizophrenia, like my dopamine is naturally being lowered because it's too high anyway. But then I was still exploring ways to raise my dopamine, even if that was something as simple as eating junk food. My diet's changed, so I've been vegetarian for a month now, and that was something that, again, I don't think there's anything immoral about even using substances, let alone eating meat or anything like that necessarily. But for me personally, it addressed the fact that I was eating meat and having to willfully force myself and ignore my own compulsion or desire, let's say, to not eat meat, to overcome it just for the gratification of the taste. And it was actually damaging my body. I've even lost, I don't know whether you can tell, but I've lost a lot of body fat as well. Like I'm slimmer as well now through that diet, because I'm not eating it as my main food source. And just little things like that, just challenging my own thoughts and my own perspectives and what it is that made me feel that I was uncontrolled in, and even like cigarettes. So I'm smoking a cigarette now, but I'm not going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth to the garden, because we don't smoke in a house, like every 10 minutes to smoke, because I'm not so strung out, I'm not so overstimulated on like coffee, for example, or any other substance. And it's been interesting, basically. So I just this is a little pat on the back to myself to say, well done, it's been 2 weeks. And hopefully I'll be able to report the same thing in another 2 weeks that it's been a month. And then report what that feels like as well. And just as a quick note before I go, that is a relevant point. Like, it feels like I'm healthier. It feels like I've got more energy. It feels like I'm happier. It feels like I've got more self-control. It feels more like real. My life feels more real. I'm not so driven by biochemical addiction to either food or the dopamine reward in general. And that's what I really wanted to challenge. It wasn't necessarily that any substances I might have been using, including alcohol and maybe even drugs or even caffeine and things like that, I didn't have control over the ability to do those things. I was getting, like in the morning, for example, with coffee, I would wake up and have to drink even sometimes 4 or 5 cups of coffee just to feel like I was normal and in the state that I feel normally anyway now. So yeah, that's just my little pat on the back and little acknowledgement to myself that I feel like I've really achieved something. And just because I have done this, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with people that won't, but it's just a personal achievement. It's something I really wanted to work towards. So I'm Schizophreniforms, this is my lovely garden, and see you soon. Hello there, David Bradley, aka Schizophreniforms, and I did a little video earlier about me feeling that I'd achieved quite a lot by the past 2 weeks of basically as total as possible abstinence, and I wanted to sort of discuss what helped me achieve that, really. So I've written a few notes. I'm going to sort of just go over it. It's a lovely day, it is. Beautiful summer's day. It might be one of the last summer's days, but I'm really enjoying it. That's why I'm outside in the garden again. And so the initial step of it was quite a shocking event where I woke up in hospital after accidentally nearly killing myself, basically. And instead of rejecting that and just going on with my life as I was doing it normally, the first step really was dwelling in my fear, basically, like in a healthy way, and embracing the ideas that were presented to me. So, what if I'd have carried on doing these things? Where was my life going, and was I really growing? Was I actually being honest with myself and saying, okay, this is unsustainable, this is damaging? And rather than spinning out and thinking that I'm a terrible person for it, using that energy and that fear reaction to sort of guide me forwards and add greater determination to my willpower and the idea that I don't want to be like this anymore. I don't want to be like this anymore. That was, and enough is enough was one of the guiding sort of mantras. And then part of that itself is sort of radical self-honesty. Is like really looking at my life with clear eyes and going, okay, this is actually really unhealthy, like eating badly or not exercising or not acknowledging where my thoughts were deceiving me, because I was, it was of benefit to me to let those thoughts perpetuate. Things like, like last night I went out to the pub, for example, and I didn't drink, and I thought I was really nervous, and at the start of the night I was like, I could just have half a pint. If it gets really bad, I'll have a half, and it won't be of consequence. But then I decided, no, fuck that. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to brave it and find out what I actually like, what I'm like in this situation, in this circumstance. And I just settled in after a while. I calmed down and the environment became comfortable, and I realised that no, I don't need to drink to enjoy being at the pub. And that's just an example of how that can be beneficial. That kind of honesty, that kind of like where you're deceiving yourself, looking at what you're doing, is this a thought loop? Is this a loop of intention whereby I justify behaviours? Like something a good friend of mine, Callum, said once, or we said together in a discussion, which was like, if you have to justify doing something, realistically, at least even if it's just to yourself, you shouldn't be doing that thing. It should be self-evident that it's okay and progressive and useful to do that thing, otherwise you probably shouldn't be doing it. And then a way of recognising what these thoughts were in this radical self-honesty and dwelling in my fears and things, I used the mindfulness technique, which I learned from Buddhism, and a bit of CBT techniques as well, which was sort of trying as much as I can to passively observe my internal dialogue and narratives and reactions, and listening to my thoughts, basically, which for someone who's schizophrenic, who that might be quite challenging for, was very unpleasant. and I know how to do these things as a matter of a skill when I want to, but like doing it, monitoring myself more and allowing myself to acknowledge the true reactionary nature and how like I get angry, I might want to smoke a joint, for example, rather than facing that anger and accepting the emotion, allowing it to come and go, and just not trying to influence it or react and go, oh, I shouldn't be angry, or it's right to feel angry, or any reaction to it, and just observe that I feel angry and analyse objectively why, and things like that have been really useful as well. And then, so subverting, the next idea of how I was dealing with it was by subverting my reward response and doing positive things. So creating positive affirmatory behaviours, in that, like, allowing myself to, similarly where I dwelled in the negative things I did and allowed myself to fully accept them, I dwelled in like how much of an achievement it is for me not to have a joint or a pint when I'm stressed. And really dwelling in that and feeling a sense of progress, and like each affirmation builds on the last, to the point where you just start a chain of dopamine reward, similarly that you might get in a pathological thing from, like, say, addiction, where you're compelled again and again to do the same thing. I've subverted that and compelled again and again to do positive things because it's such a greater reward, and it's actually using the addictive nature of the dopamine reward as a way to motivate myself to make positive steps in my life. And then correlating to the dopamine reward thing was basically total denial or absence from anything that normally hijacks that reward sensation. So nothing that artificially, with the exception of coffee and cigarettes, which I am still like getting used to the idea of getting out of my life, but I'm going to get, because I admit that with most of this stuff, this abstinence, it was within my power to a certain extent to stop doing them, because I wasn't constantly on drugs, I wasn't constantly drunk, I wasn't drinking a litre of vodka a day, but I was doing these things regularly enough that I felt that they were necessary and a fundamental part of my life, whereas in actuality they were just hijacking a reward system and creating a false positive, a false sense of reward. Even coffee and cigarettes do that. So I'm still going to try and eradicate them eventually, but the idea is just to remove anything that subverts that reward dopamine reaction sensation in an unhealthy way, or that is non-genuine sense of reward. It's an unearned reward. It's just you buy the drug, you take the drug, you react to the drug, and then you feel like you've done something good, or like your life might be going good, but it's actually quite an illusion. And then further to that as well is not allowing myself to substitute addictions. So not replacing stimulants with caffeine, not replacing caffeine with Red Bull, not finding a way out of that, but like finding a whole new lifestyle approach and a new way to address the sensations and the desires that I was having for the sensation. So rather than eating more junk food, for example, like quite often when people quit smoking, for example, they gain a lot of weight because they eat more foods to overcome and substitute that craving of addiction for the reward sensation itself that you get from them. And I probably will face that when I quit smoking properly as well. And all of these prior things have allowed me to exert further my true desire, and like with mindfulness and recognizing with this self-honesty what my true desires are, like who I actually want to be, like what's important to me, and just being honest about that. And like what's important to me is like looking after my family, like my partner and my son, and being a good role model, being the change I want to see in the world, making positive steps, being affirmated as a good person, not just living on the fringes of society, like overcoming the idea that just because I'm schizophrenic it doesn't mean I need to block out those symptoms all the time, and that how I've been dealing with it hasn't been getting me anywhere, and things like that, and just exerting what my true desire is. And like part of that is achieving a state of enlightenment or oneness or a higher spiritual, I feel I have a spiritual path, and even if that's an illusion, embracing that that's something that genuinely is important to me has allowed me to make the videos I've been making, or have a higher aspiration beyond. It's pulling me into the future, basically. It's pulling me in a direction. I get up and I feel compelled. I have more to say. I have more to do. And so, with all that in mind, the last thing is challenging social norms. Is this idea that I found difficult, which I sort of managed to face quite nicely last night by going to the pub, for example, was challenging what I thought was normal behaviour, what I found acceptable. And it's things like regular drug use, regular substance abuse, regular alcohol addiction, compulsive behaviours, addictions, gaming, smoking, drinking coffee, doing things that are out of your control, being subject to your experience rather than the progenitor and manifester and direct or arbiter of change in your life, and submitting to the idea that I can't do anything, that I'm helpless, and just challenging all those ideas. Like going out last night, before I went to the pub, I went to a Chinese restaurant and got some lovely food, which was a bit of a treat, and observing drunk people in the street, for example, or even observing drunk people at the pub. I'm not judging them for that, but realising that it's socially normative to be addicted to a drug. It's socially normative to be abusive when you're drunk. Whereas we wouldn't accept that behaviour in other circumstances. We wouldn't accept people having no control over their faculties in normal circumstances. We would harshly judge that. But if someone's on a drug that we find socially normative because it's available and the government's told us that it's acceptable to use it, even though a huge amount of people in this country have either genuine alcoholism, and also like there's the socially normative thing of like abusing alcohol and binge drinking and binge drug taking. That's seen as like a normal healthy activity in some groups, and there's other parts of the world, there's other communities within the world I'm perceiving as what I think to be a social norm. There's other groups that don't do these things, that's not the whole world, and challenging my idea and preconception that I need to take drugs or drink to be an accepted or effective member of society, and actually recognising that it's making the opposite the case. So yeah, and basically just allowing myself in total to dwell on the positives and feel a bit of hope, feel a bit of optimism for what my life could be. So that's how I've been doing it, and I hope that this approach is going to compound itself even further, and eventually I will be able to make this a permanent change, and if not a permanent change, one that governs and provokes in me like a life path that I'm proud of, basically, because the one I've been on, there's elements I'm proud of, but it's not who I wanted to be really, and I realise that now, and it's driving me towards a different future. And I hope that's a bit inspiring, and even if it's not, hopefully you can look at the things that I've been saying and maybe address that in your own life if you are struggling with these things, and see how you could implement that yourself, even if it's just in a small way, to feel proud of doing the right thing, basically. So cheers, Schizophreniforms, aka David Bradley, see you later.